Uh, Hi, Andrea. Uh,
Hi, George.
thank you for doing this. Andrea Egan, who I've known for a number of years now, both as a friend and a colleague. Andrea has been, I've just done some quick math, Andrea, and you've been in fundraising about 25 years. Philanthropy
Yep.
about 25 years.
1990.
Okay.
Yep.
And you have an undergraduate degree from Syracuse and a graduate degree in public administration with a concentration on nonprofit work from Baruch. You've worked at Metropolitan Opera, in Major Gifts, you worked at Poly Prep, running their development program, did some work with us, and then raised three. How old are your children right now? Just kind of curious.
I have a 20-year-old,
Uh-huh.
and I have an 18-year-old just about to go off to college, and a 16-year-old.
Great,
So,
great.
yep.
So the reason we started these things was because I thought it would be a good way to get the perspective of different people in philanthropy, either practitioners, volunteers, board members, philanthropists, and you fit a number of those categories, and we've been talking about them in light of COVID-19, how things are going. So let me start off kind of on a personal level. How you doing?
We're doing okay. I like to say that we have a lot of first-class problems. It's not easy, having 3 teenagers and, 2 adults in the house trying to juggle their professional lives, and kids trying to juggle their education and also appreciating the need to quarantine. That's very difficult for teenagers. So there's some stress that comes along with that, and certainly some angst we've had at home about that, like many people, but I try to put it in perspective that those are better problems to have than, some of the bigger, problems other organizations or other people are having. And I think working in the nonprofit world and maybe having a different lens on, different underserved communities and how they might, be affected by the crisis, I think helps ground me. And I'm human. I definitely need to keep making sure I'm grounded throughout this.
Right. So right now, you're on the board, or have you become chair of the board at Bvmi?
Yeah, so the last 6 years I've been devoted to board service on 2 boards. I know, we'll talk more about Bvmi, but one is St. Ignatius in the Hunts Point section of the Bronx. And I was governance committee chair and on the executive committee for 5 years. And as my last year on the board, because we have term limits, I've sort of very intentionally turned over the governance committee chair role to someone else. And I mentor her a little bit and provide support where needed. And so now, as I'm sunsetting off the board, I feel like things are in good hands. Plus, I did a lot of governance work. And so the way the board functions now and is structured now, and also how they've been able to respond to the pandemic, I feel is partly due to the work I was able to do with governance. And so I'm very proud of that. Bvmi, I'm also finishing my 6th year on the board. I was supposed to be going off, but because of the transition, I've been asked, because of the crisis and a lot of things going on, because they didn't want leadership transition right now, I was asked to stay on for 1 more year. So our bylaws allow me to stay on for up to 3 years if I'm in an officer role. So the intention now is to stay on for 1 more year as board chair. And actually, same thing, I stepped down from the board chair role this year to the vice chair role with the intention of serving my last year, supporting the new chair, and then sunsetting off. And then, but he, for professional reasons, wound up having to step down from the chair role. I stepped back in. And then a month later, COVID happened. And sometimes I think things happen for a reason, that I fortunately have the time to devote to the board right now. And again, having done all this governance work, because before I was board chair, I was governance chair at Bvmi, we've got
So-
some really good processes in place that we have handled and responded to the crisis, I think, pretty well. And the silver lining, which I hope you talk about a lot with your colleagues and clients, a lot of silver linings that are coming out of this crisis. And there are up and coming leaders on our board who have very quickly risen to the top now and taken on certain tasks and subcommittee roles in response to the crisis. We've gotten a lot of unsolicited philanthropy that has allowed us to move forward on some strategic goals like telehealth that we had been putting off and just wasn't a top priority.
Mm-hmm.
And now all of a sudden, 10 days into the crisis, we became a telehealth organization. So
Right.
I think that really speaks to being deliberate about doing not only strategic planning, but doing the work to get your board functioning well and your committee structure functioning well, and bringing people into the fold and observing term limits and bringing new people in and all of those things, because when the crisis does happen, you can respond much better, as I think we have. And like I said, there have actually been some silver linings that have come out of the process.
So let me make sure I understand. So are you currently the chair?
So I'm currently the chair, one,
All right.
because I stepped back into the
Right,
role,
right.
and then two, because I agreed to stay on for an additional year. So
Right,
for
okay.
one more year, as of now,
Okay.
I'm board chair.
So describe for me what you would how you would categorize your leadership style.
I am a consensus builder. I'm a strong believer that you don't know what you don't know. You don't have to know everything, but in the words of, Jim Collins, if you've read his book, you get the right people on the bus. And I believe that that's really my strength. And quite frankly, and I don't mean to be self-deprecating or putting myself down in any way, but BVMI, as an example, we have made so much progress and have grown as an organization that we're at the point where the issues we're dealing with and the strategic goals we're addressing are way out of my they're way out of my wheelhouse. I don't feel personally I have the expertise to address a lot of these issues. But the reality is the role of the board chair is to get the people around the table who do and drive that process and facilitate. And that's what I'm really proud of, that, while there's still work to do, there's certain areas of expertise on the board we'd still like to fill. We've got some great people on the board now who are engaged and who are driving new committees and new strategic goals and are bringing us to the next level. So it's really kind of exciting to be a part of that. So if that explains my leadership style, I like to empower others.
That explains it. That explains it very, very well. Give me your elevator speech about BVMI, because there's going to be people watching this that don't know BVMI, and I've gotten to know a little bit about them, but why don't you?
So BVMI stands for Bergen Volunteer Medical Initiative. It provides free health care for the working poor in Bergen County. So it's a very specific niche, people who really fall through the cracks. They don't qualify for government assistance. They don't have access to health care through an employer. And they cannot necessarily afford a plan on the exchange or, private plan. So that is a very specific group of people. And BVMI, of course, only scratches the surface of the people who might qualify. And again, you have to be working, you have to reside in Bergen County. So we have an eligibility process that people go through to become a patient. And currently we have about 1,600 plus patients. When I came on the board, the organization celebrated its 10th anniversary last year. When I came on the board 6 years ago, we had about 900 patients, $900,000 budget. Now we've got about 1,600 plus patients and a $2 million budget in a permanent home and growing, with a very long, one of the downsides is a wait list of people who could use our services, and we just can't accommodate everybody. But the reason we are able to do what we do is because we are a volunteer-driven model. So because we are a licensed medical facility, we have a small paid staff that includes, a medical director, a nurse manager, other key staff. But we are driven by a fleet of clinical volunteers and non-clinical as well. And it's based on a national organization called Volunteers in Medicine, and there are 70 plus, maybe 80 volunteer in medicine organizations around the country. And they all are maybe a little bit different in their services, but one thing they have to do in order to be considered a volunteer in medicine clinic is to not charge for their health care. So that's a distinction, because our patients, for example, could go to what's called an FQHC, a federally qualified health care clinic, I believe that stands for, but there is a sliding scale, in which they have to pay something, and the quality of care, in some opinions, is not as desirable. And the bottom line is, these are patients who otherwise would put off their care, and particularly with chronic conditions like diabetes and, other conditions, they don't get medical care until they're in an emergent situation and they're in the emergency room, which is why it behooves the hospitals, all the hospitals in Bergen County, to cooperate with us and see our patients for specialty care and diagnostic care, because in theory, we keep patients out of the emergency room because we provide the primary care and manage these conditions up front. So it's a great organization. And I think myself personally, I've always tried to be as well-rounded as I can as far as a philanthropy person. I started out working in the field as a fundraiser. Then I became more of a nonprofit manager. I've been a volunteer. I've been in a board leadership role, and I've been a donor where my husband and I are able. So I feel like I have a real sort of 360 perspective on things. And I know for me, I can't give to every organization. I can be generous to a few. And BVMI is one where the impact is so clear, and it's such a direct return on investment, if that's the way you want to look at it. And it's just an amazing organization.
Talk to me a little bit about how philanthropy has changed at BVMI.
Well, at BVMI, and I think, I could sort of seeing this at other organizations as well. I think for the short term, we've been really pleasantly surprised. It's been a phenomenal response. A lot of sort of unsolicited, requests of how can we help you. The Russ Berry Foundation being an example, they've had a lot of press recently about how they are stepping up and which organizations they are helping during this crisis. Right. And they are also leading a consortium, I believe, of other foundations on how they need to sort of shift their giving guidelines in order to help organizations during this crisis. So off the top of my head, I forget the exact amount of the grant, but I believe within about 10 days, we were verbally approved for an $80,000 grant. And that is to help us launch telehealth, which we have since done. And so, I appreciate their initiative and being proactive in this crisis. But the reality is, and I can't really speak for myself, I have to really hats off to our executive director, our CEO, Amanda Missy. It's because the relationship existed to begin with. And we did a really good job managing that relationship with Russ Berry, as well as other funders that we've gotten, special funding from during this crisis. Because we were doing things well already, I believe has a lot to do with why they reached out to us and took initiative. And so I think, how has philanthropy changed? I think in the short term, the generosity, if you've been managing those relationships well to begin with, has actually jumped. And so we've our cash flow has actually increased a lot in these last few months.
Aside from the foundation that you just talked about, how about from individual donors? What have you, not you personally, but what has BVMI done to generate revenue?
Yep. So I'm not in the weeds of the philanthropy there, but I'm certainly on sort of been involved with the bigger picture things that we've done. And so a lot of it is just communication. We've done a lot of checking in with all of our stakeholders and how are you doing? And is there anything you need? And also, you know, the reality is a lot of our donors and a lot of our volunteers are in that high risk category and are home and are isolated by themselves. And they have family members who were personally hit, you know, financially or medically or whatever. So we did a lot of that in the beginning, is really just communication and being in touch. We have been flexible in expanding our typical services, you know, with our patients. I mean, we had to close the clinic. Now we're just starting to slowly open, but we've been, as Joanne has been involved, knows firsthand, we've been partnering with the food banks and other organizations and delivering food to our patients. I mean, that's not in our mission, and it's not, but, you know, it's an example of how we've been able to quickly sort of rethink how we spend our time and how we're taking care of our patients. And of course, all of that is being communicated to our stakeholders, and we have launched some additional funds to help support the effort to support our patients during this time. So we've had a couple of different funds, and again, getting back to managing our relationships well to begin with, again, we've had donors reach out to us and say, how can I help? What are we doing for our patients besides their health care, blah, blah, blah. So we're sort of a conduit, you know, a trusted source to help our donors help contribute to the bigger picture, not just our patients, but
so again, just for clarity, again, the Joanne that Andrea just made reference to is my wife, Joanne, who right before the pandemic began, she had been hired as a nurse practitioner, both in a paid and a volunteer position, kind of a combination of both. And unfortunately, with the pandemic, she hasn't been able to really start, and she's looking forward to that. But Andrea, the people, again, that might be viewing this, I think that video that you guys did was just very powerful.
It was actually put together for a virtual fundraiser we had. It wasn't our big gala, but it was a small fundraiser, which, you know, was another way of raising funds, by the way. It's generating funds for PPEs as we start to open. But I think we were having some technical difficulties with the format of the video, and we're trying to figure out how to get it out to the masses, because I agree with you, it's very powerful. And Joanne was very prominently featured, as she should be, because I'm pretty impressed that, because especially the pandemic happened right when she was supposed to get started, the fact that she's coming and delivering food to our patients and not having been really a part of the BVMI community for a long time really speaks volumes, and we've been so thrilled to have her.
Yeah. Well, she has fallen in love with the cause, and it was really a great privilege for her to do that.
Wanted me to finish my elevator speech, I will say what you said. I tell people all the time.
We're in a very tall building. You know that.
Well, you know, I tell people all the time pretty much what you said. We have to get people to the clinic. I mean, right now we can't during the pandemic, but before the pandemic, and hopefully when things open up a little bit more, we get people there and we get them to see it and touch and feel what it is that we do and really understand the impact. And people are so ready to invest, whether it's volunteering their time, being generous financially. It really is amazing. And so that's the key. It's, you know, like anything else, it's word of mouth and getting people there. And everybody who does it, I mean, we I mean, it's so genuine that we really do love it and feel great about the work that we're doing.
You know, I think people around the state of New Jersey, maybe even people in the greater New York area, see Bergen County as a very privileged area. And to an extent it is, but when you see those images of those people reacting to someone bringing them food, it was very emotional. I found it very emotional,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and
And
I will say, even for me, you know, I've always been so focused on the board work because I feel it's important for organizations, for their sustainability. It's so
right.
critical. And I have a personal intellectual interest there, and I'm allowed to roll up my sleeves in the governance space at BVMI. So it's great.
Mhm.
But sometimes even you know, you lose sight of the work we do, and you have to make that extra effort to actually go out there and volunteer with your constituency, with the people that you're serving, to really put into context what it is that you're doing. So it's been great for me, to your point, to deliver food and to start, you know, practicing my Spanish again, because a lot of our patients are Spanish speaking, and just to hear the emotion and the gratitude. And we have amazingly grateful patients all the time. It is just incredible. One of the things we do at our gala is we do a wine pull, like a lot of people do, and you know, you pick a number and you get a bottle of wine, and it could be a $50 bottle of wine, a $10 bottle of wine. You don't know what you're going to get, but on each paper bag we have messages of thanks and gratitude, happily written by our patients. It's almost always written in Spanish, so then we have to have it in Spanish with English translation. The messages of gratitude, it's just unbelievable. We have a little, you know, cash box in the reception area, and there's constantly, you know, dollar bills and notes of gratitude, and, you know, from our patients. It's just amazing to see. And we really, with so many stories that we literally have saved lives. We know we have saved lives.
Yeah, you know, listening to you talk about governance, I know we share the experience of serving on numerous boards, leading numerous boards. I was touched by your comment about your level of expertise can go just so far. So one of the things that I've had the personal both privilege and responsibility of serving as a chair, as you know, of Ramapo College, and certainly the level of expertise that's required to do that is for me it was manageable because of my background in philanthropy, my background in governance, but it does test you. There's absolutely no question.
Yep.
One of the first things that I did when I became chair is that I realized that there really wasn't a good assessment of the president in the past. So I brought in somebody from the outside who does nothing but that. And he worked assessing not only the President Peter Mercer, but also his whole cabinet. And it was a good baseline to then build on. So, but getting back to another thing you were saying is that when you look at all the prerequisites of a successful nonprofit, to a great extent, board leadership, the quality of governance, the way they function or don't function is going to have a lot to do with the eventual success. So I think the work that you did and continue to do is very important to those nonprofits. And I guess you're going to be up for some new challenges in the future.
Absolutely. So it's interesting. You know, it's interesting serving, you know, in this capacity. I think you know, just professionally, and how that translates back in, say, I want to go back into the institutional side versus pursuing, you know, I do some consulting. I've really devoted most of my time to the board work, which I view as pro bono because of the extent of the work I do and the expertise I provide. And then I do a little paid consulting, running board retreats, and I've taught, you know, in a certificate program at Baruch College for aspiring nonprofit CEOs. But ultimately, you know, translating this experience back onto the institutional side doesn't always come across clearly to people. I think particularly in very large nonprofits where maybe the development function didn't interact with the board and didn't interact with the chief executive's office the way maybe there's a closer relationship in a smaller organization. And so when people look at my resume, well, you've been a board chair and you've done this in governance, and why do you want to come back to, you know, the institutional side, or why do you want to be a fundraiser, or, you know, it's interesting. I think it's very relevant experience. And I think that partnership, you know, I mean, I think the best model anyway is for your chief advancement person to have it, to be part of the senior management team, to have a strategic seat at the table. But I think having that perspective of the board and how the board functions is so important, but it's frustrating because I don't think that gets communicated well, you know, so I'm working on that.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
or, you know, obviously are moving into a CEO role, you know, that makes a little more sense because you've got the track record of the board experience, which I'm told time and again, a lot of CEO candidates lack the board experience. In addition to lacking fundraising experience, they don't get the board piece. And so that's sort of, you know, where I come in.
Andrea, I want to thank you for taking the time and doing this with me. Thank you for all that you're doing at Bvmi and the impact it has on our home, on Bergen County, which is a great place to live. And I look forward to continuing our dialogue and seeing you once this time passes, hopefully sooner than later.
Oh, well, I want to thank you, and thank you for being, you know, a great mentor and friend and colleague. And, you know, I learned so much for what I do now, you know, from the time I spent working with you. And of course, we've, you know, continued to be colleagues over the years, which I'm grateful for. But I am, you know, immensely proud of, you know, my work in philanthropy, and particularly the board work and how that's impacted the great work of Bvmi. And the fact that I was able to come on and talk to you about it today is a thrill. So thank you.
Great. You take care. Be well.
All right. Say hi to Joanne.
I will. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.